Attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right, good afternoon. It looks like we've got some registration this time on this chat, and so I would like to see, first off, if you can actually hear my voice. If you would, please type in the question area that you can hear me. How about Brenda Perry? Or else speak and I might be able to hear you.
I hear you.
Brenda Perry?
I hear you.
How about now? Brenda Perry, can you hear me?
I hear you.
All right. Let's see. What about Jessica High? Either you can type in a response or let me know that you are here. Okay, so Jessica said she can hear. What about, let's see, who else was here? Catherine Bernardi?
Yes, I'm here.
All right. Well, what we're doing is, this is the second in a series of on-air chats for Anatomy and Physiology 101. And so we're getting ready to get into that fourth week or fifth week, and this chapter is about tissues. Is that what you four are all on?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. So what we'll do is we'll take a look at that, and I will talk about it first, and I'll try to ask some questions throughout. Now, can you see me on the camera?
Yes.
I can.
All right, and can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I want to make sure that we're able to do. So what I'm going to do is pull up a PowerPoint that I put together that kind of summarizes the chapter itself, and go through some of this. So now, can you folks see the PowerPoint that's up?
Yes.
Okay. Now, the plan is on these each week is that I talk, first, and they suggested 40 to 60 minutes. It doesn't have to be that long, but then we'll leave, after we talk about it together, there'll be some time at the end for additional questions you might have about the chapter. Now, as far as particular questions go about your own grades that you've got so far, you'll have to contact whoever that online instructor is, since I don't have that access. I'm just here to talk about the material. Sometimes when you hear things from somebody else, it kind of, you have kind of like an aha moment and go, oh, I understand now. So that's one of the reasons for doing these. We're in hopes that hearing this information from another avenue or another point will help you be successful in the course. Anybody's got questions on that so far? Okay. Well, let's take a look at this first slide here. And can any of you tell me, without even looking at a book, do you know what the definition of a tissue is? Anybody want to try that out? Jessica, do you know what the definition of a tissue is? Can you folks still hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, here, I see it. Okay. That's what I wanted to see, was that. I can get that to open. Well, hopefully you remember that a tissue is a group of similar cells that are going to work together to perform a particular function, okay, whether it be for your skin or for your muscles or, whatever it might be. And then the whole study of that is called histology. In a 4-year university, they actually have just a histology course, and that's all you do the whole semester is you focus on different types of tissues and recognizing those tissues and so forth. And so you're getting just a taste of it from here. Now, how many of those groups are there of tissues? There's 4 groups, okay? And we're going to talk about each one of those groups, but we're also going to throw in some other things that help us recognize that they are tissues. So here is a beginning about, we're talking about cells together comprising tissue material, and so what's going to keep those cells together? If they're individual cells to begin with, how are we going to keep them together so that they can do some jobs that we need them to do? And so one thing that we look at are what we call tight junctions. And it's just what it sounds like. What does tight mean to you? Well, it's real close to each other. And so with those tight junctions, those are types of things that we don't necessarily want things to be passing through that space, okay? Now, in the picture that you see, they're showing you some tight junctions and what it looks like without tight junctions on those cells. They've got some cilia structures there. Those can help with absorption, but the tight junctions don't have an overall control over it. And so those are going to be things that are going to help us form linings. Would you have any idea where those might be within the body? I'm not sure what happened to my question list, so hang on just a second. There it is. Anybody want to type? Why don't you guys try also typing in an answer to that response? I can see Jessica's typed in. Brenda said she can hear me. Catherine, can you type into the question area so that I can see that it's going to work? Okay. Now, do you know, any of you ladies, do you know where that tight junctions might be? It's the cells that can form linings, and it's got some cilia on them. So that's going to be in structures like the respiratory, if we will, okay? And Jessica said not without looking. And you're right, Catherine, that's going to be a form of epithelial tissue, which we'll take a look at. Okay, now I can see that you guys are coming in with answers, and I'm going to decrease that a little bit. Okay, so if we don't have tight junctions, we've got some other types of formats. We have some desmosomes, and I call them welding spots. And let me see if I can get this pen to work. These structures around here, that's what reminds me of an old-fashioned rivet when we talk about welding things together. And these are not going to be as tight as tight junctions are. There's going to be a little bit of gaps in there. But one thing that will be nice is the fact that these are all proteins. You notice how it says anchoring proteins and then membrane proteins. If you remember out of the groups of biomolecules, proteins are the ones that have the most variety of jobs. And here's a good example of it. You have this big rivet, basically, anchoring 2 cells together, and then you've got these fibrous proteins here and intermediate proteins that are going to help keep those cells and link those cells together. So we have a lot of these, as I put down here at the bottom, on our outer skin. So we keep that skin tissue together. The third type are gap junctions, and it's just what it sounds like. Let me get that erased off of there. Hopefully, there. When we talk about a gap junction, now we're talking about, whoops, hang on just a second. I got a little crazy with the drawing tool. When we talk about the gap junctions, a lot of times they're what we would consider tunnels that are going through these cells to hold them together. And if you remember our cells, these are our phospholipid bilayers right here. So you have 2 sets of that because they're showing these 2 cells being put together. Notice it says a connexon exon, but the gap junction itself is a tunnel through there. And also, it'll show that there are different types of, I'll show you down here, different types of channels that we could have with these gap junctions. And they literally will have a gap in between them. And these are the structures here that I'm talking about that will allow materials to pass through, but also to hold on those cells to make up that particular type of tissue. And in this example, that is showing you what we consider cardiac muscle, heart muscle. You've got some of those. These are proteins, and sometimes they'll look like those membrane complexes, and they'll have those tunnels through there. So you can have some communication that way. So those are the ways that cells are being held together, forming together, some of the ways to make up some tissue. Then we mentioned there are 4 types of tissue, and one of the types of tissue is epithelial. And I know you have, like I said, I know you guys have a PowerPoint, but then I just try to pull out some stuff to generalize it a little bit better for a quick study, if you will. Now that doesn't mean it's replacing the PowerPoints that you have, but this will be into addition to what you have. Okay? Let me check to see if you got any questions right now. Maybe if I can get that to open up. There we go. Okay. Earlier, Catherine mentioned epithelial tissue, and that's one of the first ones we'll look at here. Notice it talks about covers areas, lines, organs, especially hollow organs, cavities. We talk about internal cavity areas. It says free surface and basement membrane. When we look at these cells, we're going to look at them, how they're against other tissue, other materials. And so basement would be towards the bottom, and the free surface would be out towards the top. Most of them are non-vascular, which means that they're not going to have a lot of blood flow through them. There are a few that will, and even those will not have, will be more on the capillary level. They're going to go through some cell division. So who remembers what kind of cell division body cells will go through? Not sex cells, but body cells. You can either type it in or say it. What kind of cell division is there? You would have already covered this.
Is it mitosis?
Mitosis. Brenda put it up there, mitosis, and I also heard it. Yeah, so we're talking about, like in your skin cells, you brush off thousands of those all the time, every day. And so you're with the hopes that your cells are continually going through that cell division so that you've got some of those to replace it. So there's a lot of that mitotic cell division going on there. Cells are pretty tight. I mean, they're going to be coverings and they're going to be lining, so we want those cells close together to make up that tissue. And then we end up classifying that by their shapes and also by how many layers that they have. And we're going to take a look at that. Now, any questions on the basics of that so far?
No.
Okay. All right, then we'll go a little further here, and we'll start to look at these. Now, I am not 100% sure on whether you'll have identification of histology slides on the quiz, but I'd be willing to bet if you don't have questions about it on the exam, about actual histology slides, there'll be questions about those particular tissues. And so in the slides that you're going to see now, what I did was I just basically picked some of those off of, if you go to Google and you go to click on images instead of web, you can just type in any type of tissue that you want, and they'll come up with hundreds of histology slides for you to look at. So if you need practice on that, that's a good place to go. So remember I said epithelial is classified by the shape and how many layers they have. Anytime you see that term simple, that means it's going to be a single layer of cells to make that tissue. Also, this one says simple squamous. So think of squamous as a broad, flattened cell, like your skin cells. And a lot of times we consider those, if they're broad and flat, they're going to help with passing material through it easily. So another area that you're going to see, if you notice in this picture, it talks about it has a labeling of the lumen of a large blood vessel, in this case a vein. So lumen just means the opening that the blood flows through, and if you notice, the nuclei of the squamous cells are actually highlighted there or pointed out by the arrow. So then the rest of them, all the way around here, these are the flat squamous cells in a single layer that we have. Okay, so they're going to be good, like I said, to help us with actually like the lining of those blood vessels. That's going to help us also when we constrict and dilate those blood vessels. You're also going to see those in places like your respiratory, where you have alveoli and other structures that you can have some diffusion take place. Okay? The next one then, hang on just a second, is simple cuboidal. Now, cuboidal means cube-shaped, and if you look, these aren't perfectly cube-shaped, but they're more cube-shaped than any other structures that you're going to see. So we're talking about these structures right here. These are considered cuboidal. Now, remember earlier when I said basement membrane versus free surface? This would be considered the basement membrane here, and this would be the free surface here. Okay? Simple cuboidal, so that means it's also one layer. Notice it says secretes and absorbs. So if you think about your kidneys, for example, especially when you get into 102, you're going to end up talking about the kidneys and their jobs of secreting and absorbing. You're going to notice that you can find these in the tubules of your kidney. Single shape, cube, or single layer and cube shape. Okay? All right. Any questions on that?
No.
Okay. Then we also have columnar, and just like it sounds like, these are going to be longer than they are wide to make these columns. You're usually going to see one nucleus, and it's going to be towards what we consider the basement membrane. And if you notice in this particular picture, we've got what we call goblet cells highlighted here. When we talk about the exocrine glands and some endocrine glands, these goblet cells are there to release mucus out into the tissue. And so when we talk about those types of things, we're talking about those that are usually secreting some type of mucus. And I don't know how well you can see it from where you're at, but this has also got some cilia, little small hair-like structures all along there. That's going to help with absorption and also trapping some particles within that. So you can think about that with respiratory, for example. Even with our intestines, we'll see those within the intestines. Then we have what's called pseudo stratified. Now, pseudo means false, and so it gives you an idea that it has false layers. And the reason for that is you don't have one single nuclei at the basement membrane like you do in some of the other structures. And so the nuclei are kind of like all over the place. And that gives you an idea that you've got multiple layers there, and actually you just have a single layer. A lot of times you're going to find those within the respiratory system. And here again, I don't know how well you can see it, you've got some cilia out here to trap particles. Then, if it's not a single layer and it's multiple layers, we call that stratified. So remember, it's how many layers and shape. So we had a simple squamous, where we've got a stratified squamous. So in this picture right here, when they look at this structure, notice that they're talking about from here to here. That's several layers of cells, and they're making up what we call that squamous epithelial area. the ones towards the top seem nice and squashed together. Notice it says keratinized, and if you remember, keratin is a really strong protein. And here again, this is going to be found within our skin, for example. So you know that you lose those skin cells, that they better be going through the mitosis, mitotic division. That'll start towards the bottom and push on the way up. Okay. Now, anytime you guys have a question, make sure you stop me and I'll stop and address it, hopefully. Then we have stratified cuboidal, like we had simple cuboidal. So I'm not sure, here again, this is one where we have more than one layer of cuboidal cells in here together. Notice it even says sweat gland ducts are involved in there. So there's part of that endocrine system we like to talk about. Cube shape again, not a perfect cube, but we know that they're more cube shaped than they are columnar. And speaking of columnar, here we go with stratified layers. So in this case, we do have more than one layer. And so if you look closely here, we've actually got two basic layers, and you can see that because of these nuclei that are in each of the layers. And so we do have multiple layers. Also down here, I don't know how well you can see it underneath, you've even got some cube-shaped that are down below, and usually that's the case, that you could see those cube-shaped later on. And when we look at stratified columnar, sometimes we can talk about that being like in your pharynx, for example, or some of the male reproductive structures actually have some of that stratified columnar. Get out of that pen there. Here's transitional. And just think of transition. When you're in transition, you're usually changing from one thing to another. So you can think of transitional epithelial the same way. You've got multiple layers, and you have some cube shape, but you've also got some more column elongated shapes up there towards the top. And as it shows you here, that is a big part of the urinary bladder. And we know the urinary bladder, we talk about stretch receptors and so forth, and being in that transitional state actually helps that out, especially with urinary bladder, urethra, even your ureters. You'll find these two, the transitional cube and columnar shapes together. Okay? All right, so that's a little bit of background about epithelial. Do you folks have any questions about epithelial?
No.
All right. Looks like we have a couple more people. Let me get your mics unmuted. We have Kelly and Sandra with us now. When you have your microphones on, make sure that you don't have some background noise. You may have to get some earbuds or headsets to go with this. But anytime that you have a question, go ahead and type it in, or just ask it and I'll try to address it. All right, then one other part that's mentioned is glandular epithelium. We always talk about endocrine and exocrine glands, and we've got some of these that are in what we call unicellular glands versus multicellular glands. And you probably have in that PowerPoint a slide showing you the different structures, whether they're branched or not, or a single tube. But we know when we talk about exocrine glands, we talk about them releasing material out into the environment that they're in. So this slide that I found has the three sets of glands in it that your chapter will be talking about specifically when we talk about merocrine glands and apocrine and holocrine. So the merocrine, we usually think about that mostly with the sweat glands. And so you see the structures there releasing material, and sometimes we release it in vesicles. Vesicles help carry things outside the membrane. Apocrine, that would be more of, notice it's the mammary glands and the release of material there. And then also holocrine glands, they're also kind of like an oily type of gland. And one thing that you should keep saying here repeatedly in these pictures is, if you look, notice that they talk about a Golgi apparatus here. They show it again here. You don't necessarily see it in the Holocron gland picture, but you got to remember the job of the Golgi apparatus is basically kind of like packaging and distribution, if you will. And so it's getting that material ready to go out into the environment. Also, here's another term that's mentioned on this slide, stem cells. And if you remember that definition, stem cells are those things that don't have a specific job yet, and they have to be triggered to go into one direction or another. And so this is showing you at the basement membrane the stem cells, and now we've got mitosis taking place down here. You know, prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase. So we need to have those cell divisions so we have replacement take place. Over here, there's looking at a hair oil gland, like I mentioned, the sebaceous gland, and that's part of the holocron. Don't forget, integument-wise, they're going to talk about this pili muscle that's going to help that hair stand up, especially like when you get goosebumps or something like that. So endocrine system, you're going to end up talking about that in big detail, or great detail in 102. All right, any questions on those glands that are mentioned? Now somebody has their, I can barely hear somebody's response, so I don't know if you need to turn your volume up or not. But I'm not sure who it is that's speaking at the time. All right, let's take a look at connective tissue, the second type of the four. Just as protein was the most abundant biomolecule, connective tissue is the most abundant type of tissue. Now, somebody has a microphone that we've got some feedback on, and I'm not sure who it is. So what I may do is I may mute you for a little bit and then come back in and unmute you. Okay. So connective tissue, the most abundant, the most common, has the biggest variety of different functions or different jobs. Also, they're going to talk about extracellular matrix, which is there to help bind and support, and in some cases give some nutrients to that tissue. Vascularity, here again, compared to epithelial, there's a lot more vascular material here for nutrients to get to this tissue, to wash over the tissue, than there are for epithelial. So anywhere from capillaries to more arterial and venous. Dividing cells here again. So some of these categories you need to have mitosis to go through so that we can replace some of the other tissue as it gets old or damaged. Here's some cell types that are mentioned. Fibroblasts. Now, if you remember the suffix blast, that means building. Osteoblast, which is going to be talked about probably with the connective tissue here and in the next chapter or two. Blast means building. And so that's one of the most common cell types that you're going to find with connective tissue, and it helps produce the fibrin and some protein support. Mast cells are there to release heparin and histamine, so we talk about help with blood flow, help with swelling, you know, especially with repair of damaged tissues. Macrophages, those just mean they're part of our immune system, and their macro means big, so we talk about them being big eaters. They're going to go in and take care of some debris in areas. Some of the fibers that you're going to find within connective tissue, notice it says collagenous. So think of collagen, and a lot of you know that collagen is there. It's a tough protein material for support. It's got some what we call good tensile strength. When you see that, it should be white in color. Reticular is now, I call it a thinner version of collagenous tissue. So it's not going to be able to have as much support, but for delicate areas and delicate tissues. And then elastic tissue, you know, think about it. It's got some flexibility. So elastic tissue you could find, for example, like in your earlobes, that type of material. Then when we look at the different types of connective tissue, we can break them down into certain categories. And so connective tissue proper is actually put into two groups, loose and dense. And there's probably a couple when you look at these that you've heard of before or sound familiar to you. And so one of them may be adipose. You might have heard of that before. That's our fat or energy material tissue. And then the elastic, something similar to those fibers I just mentioned. So areolar, reticular, regular, and irregular may be new ones to you that you do not know. And so we'll take a look at those. Let me get out of that. All right. So what I've done is on this particular slide, I placed the loose on the left and the dense on the right that you see there. And in that loose category, this one at the top, let me get my highlighter. This up here, this is a adipose tissue. And so it looks like they're kind of open, vacant type of cells, but that means they have fat oil droplets within them. But like I said, that's adipose tissue, and we need that for storage, for energy source. And you probably know with fat tissue that you may have had a grandparent sometime that you've gone into the house, or an elderly person in the middle of the summer, and the house is like 152. It's so hot. Well, their layer of fat and adipose tissue has gone thinner over time, and they don't have as much insulation as some of us do. This one in the middle then kind of looks like a mess. Well, that happens to be the areolar tissue. That's part of the loose that they're talking about. You can see nuclei in here, and you can see some of that tissue material all over the place. No nice, neat structure. Then when we get down into the third one here, these are what we call reticular fibers. All these little lines through here, that's part of what we call the loose reticular fibers of reticular connective tissue. Here again, they're not in a nice, neat, organized pattern, and they're holding these cells all together here, giving them support. Then on the right-hand side, you've got three pictures here to show you what we consider dense connective tissue. And so we talk about it being dense, regular, and irregular. Now the reason it's called regular, this looks kind of nice, patterned tissue with cells put together here. Well, those fibroblasts are there helping that out, and those collagen fibers are giving them support. When you get down, so that's what we call dense regular. Down here, notice how that doesn't seem like there's a nice even flow or pattern compared to what we had before above it. So this is called dense irregular. And so you can tell the difference between regular and irregular here, but also make the connection between dense and loose types of connective tissue. Look at all the openings and gaps you have over here where these are nice and packed tight. So that'd be one way to identify them. Then when you get down here, if you guys ever seen a piece of elastic before, these are elastic tissues with these little stretching kind of capability to it, these little wavy parts. Notice it's still packed close together. You don't see a lot of gaps in it like you did over here with the other two. So this is what we call elastic. It has elastin, a protein in there with for flexibility, and that allows us to consider that under the dense category. Okay. Next slide looks at those that are what we call more specialized. Now these people tend to be more familiar with. I don't know if you've ever seen a slide of bone tissue, but this kind of reminds me of a cross-section of a tree as you cut it with rungs around the tree. Okay, and each of these structures, it says it's an osteon. That means it's basically a bone tissue cell. Over here, this one is a type of cartilage. We've got three different types of cartilage, and this is just one of them. And then this is one you're probably familiar with. This is a picture of red blood cells, and the structures that you see here that are kind of a purpley shade, those are, well, actually you've got 1, 2, 3 different types of white blood cells. So you know you can tell here you're going to have a lot more red blood cells and a lot less white blood cells. But those are all forms of connective tissue. This is the three different types of cartilage that we have. The first one is hyaline cartilage up here. So you might have heard the term chondrocytes. I don't know how well I could spell with this draw. Hang on just a second. I don't know how well this is going to look, but we'll put it up here. Not too good, but I think you're going to get the point. These are going to be chondrocytes. It's also spelled in that last picture there. That's taking a look at cartilage cells. That's what these structures are here, also here, and then these are a little bit, you can see more of the rows of these, not as in depth as you can in these two. But chondrocytes are cartilage cells. Cytes means cells. And so anytime you see that main stem word chondro, that's talking about cartilage. So this picture here, this is the most common type of cartilage that we have. This is hyaline cartilage. Now hyaline cartilage you're going to find in a lot of cases at the ends of your bones. When we talk about people that have cartilage that's been worn away over time because of weight or activity or age, it's usually their hyaline cartilage. You're going to have a lot of that cartilage within your nose, for example. The next one then, that is an elastic cartilage. Now that's the one that you'll find, for example, like your outer ear with that elastin in it. And then, like it says in this labeled picture here, this last one is that you'd find within the discs. Well, you need to think about that. That's called fibrocartilage, and we want it to be really tough because it's between those discs. And we know that that's going to be a major player as far as gravity pulling down on us all our life, weight and so forth, that it's there for shock absorbing. And that's where some people have some problems with discs slipping out or degenerating, deteriorating, that type of thing. Okay? All right, let's clear that out. All right, I'm going to unmute you so that we can see if any of you have any questions so far. Any questions on connective tissue or on epithelial tissue?
No.
Okay. All right. Types of membranes are mentioned. Here again, along with some of that tissue, we also talk about, hang on just a second, let me get back to you folks. There we go. We have membranes that are also important for us as far as when we talk about overall tissues and helping with those. Serous tissues, when we talk about serofluid, and we know that those are also there to help shock absorbers for us. They're going to help cover things, line things. They're also going to help with secretion of glandular material, mucus. If it's mucus, I put there, what does it sound like? So it's going to be releasing mucus. So where do you want those types of membranes at? And so you can think of things like respiratory, whether it be through your lungs and that type of thing, or also salivary even, that type of thing. Cutaneous, when we talk about cutaneous, we talk about skin, we talk about covering the body, and then synovial joints. Just think of the joint in your knee that you've got some synovial membrane, synovial fluid. Those are there to help with that reduction of friction as those bones and everything tend to work together. And so that's the synovial part's a big area right now that they're looking at as far as, we always talk about knee replacements, but also about taking care of that cartilage so you don't get to the point of that knee replacement. Next type of tissue is muscle tissue. 3 categories of muscle tissue. And I would imagine 2 of them right away you can probably think of. You know, usually students think of cardiac and skeletal muscle right away, but then we need to remember there is a 3rd type, and that's smooth muscle. Now, the reason that we call it smooth muscle is it has a property of being non-striated. Anytime you see that word striation, they're looking at the structure of the muscle tissue that's called a sarcomere. And as your muscle proteins help you contract and relax, these areas, A band and I band, are going to be a darker area. So you don't see that in smooth muscle, and I'll show you on the pictures in a minute. When we talk about cardiac versus skeletal, they're going to use the term striated, where there are those darker bands of protein material. You also want to be able to know whether they're voluntary or involuntary. So smooth muscle and cardiac muscle, we consider them involuntary. You don't have to sit there and say, okay, heart, let's beat, and then a few seconds later go beat again. Your heart's going to beat on its own, we hope. Same thing with smooth muscle. Let's say you swallow some food, starts to go down the esophagus. You don't have to sit there and go, okay, let's swallow and move it further. Let's go down farther. You've got peristaltic action that helps get that food, what they tend to call a bolus, down to the stomach. Blood vessels, same thing. You know, we want to be able to dilate and constrict those blood vessels so that we can, you know, do whatever we need to do with them, regulate blood pressure, get nutrients to the tissue. The skeletal muscle then, though, that's the one that we consider voluntary. If I said, okay, let's all take a break, we think about, okay, I need to stand up, go out to the bathroom, go out to the sink, that type of thing. So that may be one or a couple ways that you want to put these muscles into categories, whether they're striated or not, and whether they're voluntary or not. Let me show you some pictures of what I've got here. This one at the top, I'm going to go ahead and mute you again because somebody's doing some work around us. Okay, this one at the top, that one is considered a smooth muscle. And one of the reasons for that, whoops, hang on just a second, I'm marking all over the place. One of the reasons that it's considered smooth, like I said, it doesn't have striations in it like you see here in these 2 pictures. You can actually literally see these vertical bands on these 2 muscle slides. This one is smooth. Now these other structures that you see right here, these are nuclei, and in a smooth muscle they're pretty long and cylindrical, kind of long and drawn out. Okay, so this one's smooth. And I tried to remember to put them in the order that I had them on the slide before. And that looks horrible. This one is cardiac. And like I said, you can see the bands, the striations. You can see the nuclei. Those are kind of big nuclei. But then you might notice these structures right here. And here, and they're all over intermittently through this slide. Those are called intercalated discs. Those are areas where the cells are coming together, and they're basically helping those cells become, or hold on to become, tissue. And so that, when you see the term intercalated discs, that's what they're talking about. Now this one then, this is skeletal muscle. This one reminds me of, if you think of a piece of salmon, how you can see those striations in there rather easily. You see a lot more of these nuclei. They're still kind of long and drawn out. But skeletal muscle looks nice and more organized, where cardiac kind of looks like it's all over the place. Okay? So cardiac and skeletal both have the striations. Smooth doesn't. Cardiac and smooth are involuntary. Skeletal is voluntary. Okay? What questions do you have over muscle tissue? Hang on. Does anybody have questions over muscle tissue? Jessica or Kelly, one of you have some background noise. All right, anybody? I'm sorry, does anybody have any questions over muscle?
No.
Okay. All right, then the last one of the four is nerve tissue. We've only got one category, if you will, about nerve tissue, and you're going to see the name neuron. It's just another name for nerve cell. Not only are they going to talk about the nerve cell, they're also going to talk about glial cells, or they might even call them neuroglial cells. Those are there to help out those nerve cells, to support them, to insulate them, to help them grow properly. Where would you find nerve tissue at? Somebody give me an answer, whether you write it out or not. Where are you going to find nerve tissue at in your body?
Your brain.
Yeah, definitely your brain. Where else? Brain's your only place you've got nerve tissue? What about your spinal cord? So spinal cord, brain, and then you'll have them throughout the body, which we call peripheral nerves. So we know that we're talking about sensory receptors and also sending nerve impulses, action potentials, information throughout the body. So if you ever placed your hand on a hot stove, it only took you a few milliseconds for your brain to figure out that's hot and you needed to remove your hand. So you'll have chapters at the end of this semester that are going to be on nerve tissue throughout the whole body. All right, now what I'm showing you now at the bottom left, this is an actual picture of a true nerve cell. And here's some basic parts. We talk about this being the cell body, and inside of it you have a nucleus and a nucleolus. Nucleus, we consider that the control center of the cell. Nucleolus a lot of times has some RNA, some other genetic information in it. Now, incoming information, in this picture it's coming in this way. I don't know how well you can see it. This information is probably coming from another nerve cell into the cell body. When this cell's ready to send information out, it's going to send it out this way. Now, the structures over here, like it says, these are called dendrites. Incoming information. Outgoing information is going to go from an axon. So just think of axons going away from that nucleus. Now, this information can go on to another nerve cell, or it can end up going on to a muscle cell, because we need that nerve impulse to get us to work our muscles properly. The glial cells that are mentioned, things like, here's a microglia, that helps the immune system, that helps take care of some invaders that are there. Here's astrocytes. These are the astrocytes are the ones you have the most of the type of glial cells. Notice they're there for support of axons and dendrites to each other. Oligodendrocytes, that's a big 50-cent term for the central nervous system. That's going to help form myelin around nerve cells. And myelin's going to help an impulse travel faster. You also have a layer of single cells up here. I don't see where they've labeled it, but that's called ependymal cells. That's going to be there for support and guiding growth of those nerve cells. So you've actually got other structures there to help those nerve cells grow. Okay? Questions on any of that? All right, now that's all that I have as far as the slideshow part. What kind of particular questions do you guys have about this chapter? Anything? Let me take it back and make sure you're unmuted. So now would be what they would like you to do is a question and answer period if you have anything specifically that you need to ask. Nobody has any questions? And you guys can still hear me, right? Catherine wants to know, can you explain wound healing? Are you talking about when we have inflammation first, and then you have specific immune cells that get there, like the neutrophils? Is that what you're asking about, Catherine? Okay. So yeah, let's say you have a problem with your tissue. Your body's got a good mechanism built in right away where it actually wants to swell the tissue. You know, whether you get a cut or whether you twist an ankle or something, that's one of your body's defense mechanisms, is to bring fluid into that area, and it'll actually swell that area up. Then you'll have neutrophils that'll come in first on the site that will start to take care of some of the problems that are there. You'll also have fibrinogen that'll want to come in and take care of some of the problems, whether it be like if you have some vascular tissue that needs to be taken care of. Let's see what else. If you talk about bleeding, hopefully you have a blood clotting factor that's going to start that clotting. And you know, as your tissue starts to heal, especially if you were a kid and you remember as a kid that you had a scab and it would start to get dried out, for example, and it starts to get itchy, that's because you've got contractile fibers that are trying to close that tissue area. And as a kid, we were impatient and we couldn't wait that long, and we'd take that scab right off. So you've got to think about things. It depends on how bad the wound is. You've got not only tissue, you may have muscle, you may have blood vessels, you may have nerve damage, that all those things have to be repaired. And like if it's a nerve damage, you got to make sure you still have a viable cell body there that you can have with be able to regrow axons, for example. Is that kind of what you wanted, Catherine? Okay. And then Jessica, you made a good point. Jessica said she couldn't think of any questions, but she just wanted to be able to hear somebody talk about this, so maybe it sticks in your head better than just reading it. And that's one thing that you need to consider as a study tool, that, you know, you're reading your material, you're doing your Learn Smarts, you could be jotting down notes, you listen to these. If you can't come to this every Monday from 1 to 2:30, that's fine, because these are being taped so that later on other people can hear them on their own schedule. So that's another way. Your auditory, using more than one sense. The visual, you're hearing it today, auditory. You might be engaged in asking questions, so that'd be another way. So many different ways to hear about it. All right. Anybody else got any questions? All right. So if you have questions later on, I think they've got a email reply area that you can check. I'll be here next Monday at the same time, and we'll do your next chapter then if there's nothing that I can help you with. All right. Brenda said that was all she needed, was to hear some things too. And you guys can actually play this again yourself later on if you need to. If there's some things that might help you later on, it'll be downloaded after a while, and I think you're going to be able to get to it and play it again. All right. Well, you guys have a good day, and maybe we'll see you next week.